다 동아들이 아나발에게 상물이야 공감상에게 섬주시와 잡지도
First of all, I would like to wish you all my warm greetings. So today is the sixth day of the Arya Chema sixth teachings, spring teachings. And today, on this sixth day, I would like to speak about the discussion we began the other day about the 13th good deed from the autobiographical verses Good Deeds, which we began the other day. It's about the controversy over whether or not Mikyo Dorje had written the letter objecting to the Nyingma school and so forth. And so the other day I spoke about that in general terms. And so today I would like to speak about, give a summary of the subject of the different, the objections to the Nyingma school and the various responses to those objections. Now, generally, I'm going to speak about a number of situations that are described in our Dharma histories. But we don't really take a lot of interest in the Dharma histories and don't really read them. And so, per call of your interests, I would like to speak about many different events. And so it's in order, my hope is that this can help you understand the situation and the main points clearly. Now, if I say too much, there's a danger that you might get bored. Now, I don't know whether you're getting bored or not, but my hope is that you do not get bored. Generally, in Tibetan, we talk about the ancient transmission, the later spread of the teachings. Now, I don't need to speak about how this division is made, but in any case, during the later spread of the teachings, there was the Dharma kings Yeshe and Chanche, as well as Poden Shiwa, and also the great translator Rinchen Sampo, and Gokukpa of Hatse and others. Many of these masters wrote letters or documents or texts that were refutations of false mantra. Now, the reason why we call them the refutations of false mantra is that they're looking at the practice of the secret mantra, and there are many situations where there are a lot of inappropriate usages of mantra and practices. And so that's spread widely in Tibet at this time. And so it's in order to refute that and to prevent the inappropriate use of the mantra that they wrote all these texts. But at that time, there was no clear distinction between the ancient and the new Tantra, as there is no. And also, the main object of the refutation of their different texts was to refute those who engage in the false secret mantras of union, liberation, and so forth. They were not refuting secret mantra, they were refuting the false uses of secret mantras. And so these practices, these false practices, occur in the ancient tradition, and they also occur in the new tradition, in the Sarma, or the new tradition. And so because they are refuting the false mantra practices does not mean that they are objecting to the Nyingma. To say if that it is, it would not be correct. And generally, when Atisha went to Tibet, the largest temple in Tibet at that time was Samye. And he went to Samye, and he spent for considerable time at Samye. Now, at that time in Samye, there was a library where they kept all the texts. And so in this library, he saw that there are many Sanskrit manuscripts of secret mantra dharma that he had never seen before when he was in India. And so he was amazed when he saw this, because when he was in India, he studied in India, and then he comes to Tibet, and there's like a remote country, and there are so many Sanskrit. When he saw so many manuscripts, he was just amazed. So he was amazed. And he was completely delighted in what the great Tibetan Dharma kings of the past had done. He said there must be like actual bodhisattvas, and he praised them highly. And the story of this is described in his liberation story. So what this shows is that at Samye, there are a whole lot of Sanskrit manuscripts of the secret mantra. That's what it shows. Likewise, later there was a master named Tropo Lotsawa, Tropo the translator. So he's from the Tropo tradition. So Tropo Lotsawa, Tropo the translator, found a Sanskrit manuscript of the Guhir Garbha Tantra at Samye. And so the manuscript was the Guhir Garbha Tantra. This is a tantra that the Nyingma consider extremely important. It's like their main source. When he found a good manuscript of it, and then he sent it with someone to offer to Chomden Drigdal. And when he offered it, and when they sent it to Chomden Drigdal, when he saw the Sanskrit manuscript, he realized that the Nyingma really has a source, and it's authoritative. And he wrote a text called the Guhir Garbha Practice Ornamented with Flowers. And this text, it's difficult as for us to get the actual manuscript now, or the actual text now, but likewise, there are many Indian commentaries that are translated from Sanskrit manuscript into Tibetan, both in Sutra and in Tantras. And among the Tantras, there's a commentary on the Buddhayana tradition of Gosamaja by Vishwamitra. And this cites many quotations from the Guhir Garbha Tantra. And so for this reason, we can say that the Guhir Garbha Tantra must have been present in India, and that there's a lot of evidence of it being there. However, within the ancient Tantras, when they taught in the Guhir Garbha, they say a lot of things. Usually we say, thus have I heard, but instead of thus have I taught, it says, thus have I taught. That's what it says. So that's likewise. It says that the explanation of the ground is immeasurable. Likewise, instead of saying that, we usually say there are 3 times, but there are four times. But the Guhir Garbha says there are 4 times. And the principal data of the mandala is Vajrasattva. And this is different than the ordinary way it's taught in the new tantra, and the sarma, the new tantras. And so this is how some people thought that these are 4 faults. They said these are faults. They said these are 4 faults or 4 mistaken faults. So they're called faults, but actually, if we look at them within the sarma tantras or the new tantras, there are similar explanations as the ones from the Guhir Garbha Tantra. So just because they have a different way of expressing something does not mean that they're not authoritative or that they have no source. I think that would be difficult to say. Likewise, when you look at the catalogs of the Kanjur and the Tenjur, we have 3. The oldest ones are the 3. There's the Pantama, then Karma, and the Chivoba. And so these are the oldest catalogs of that. So the third one is not extant anymore, but the first 2 are. So there's a Pantangma catalog, one of the old catalogs. And this includes commentaries on the Guhir Garbha Tantra by Niyya Sangye and Buddhagupta. So it also has And it also lists the commentaries on the eight classes of illusion, the commentaries of Gandharva, and the other of the great main texts. And so, for this reason, many of the main texts of the Nyingma Tantra were present during the early spread of the teachings to Tibet. Likewise, there was a great Indian Pandita who came to India called Smritidhyana, and also is the great translator Ranjit Sampo. And both of them translated some Tibetan texts into Tibetan. The one who says this is Chomden Rigla. And so Chomden Rigla was not just some Tibetan scholar. He had an extremely vast and broad knowledge of the Kangyur and Tangyur. He was a very important personage in the compilations of the Kangyurs and Tangyurs in Tibetan, so he knew them very well. Likewise, the Sakya Pandita said that there's a root tantra of Vajrakila translated from Sanskrit. And likewise, when Tarlon Nyingma went to Nepal, he saw a Sanskrit manuscript of Vajrakilaya. And so if we look at these in terms of this, we say that the practices that are included in the ancient Nyingma school were present in ancient India as well. Likewise, there are many texts from the 9th and 10th century Tibet that were unearthed in the caves of Dunhuang. And among them there's a text that's said to have been written by Buddhagupta, and it has a small collection of Dzogchen texts. So it's an important old Dzogchen text. So they found an old manuscript of this. Likewise, also within the Dunhuang text, there's also an account of the origins of Vajrakilaya Tantra. So I think there's so many different manuscripts and texts to examine and areas to consider that if we don't examine them and immediately say that the Nyingma are false, I think that is not correct. So General Gyalchen, when they talk about Dzogchen teachings on mind, space, and instructions, they probably were not widely known in India. But just because they were not widely known, that doesn't mean that they're not true or that they're not correct. And the reason for that is that in ancient times in India, when they're doing Tantra practice, they did it in very strict secrecy. It wasn't like something they do where the Bhagavad didn't say, oh, please come, we're doing an empowerment, everyone come, and then do it in the public. It's not like that. And now we've all started making everything like this. If someone's going to take if a student is going to take going to take an exam, we say, "Oh, come take a Manjushri empowerment." If there's a business who wants their business to go well, then we say, "Oh, come on and take a Jabal empowerment." And so we don't actually say the words, but that's how it is. But in the present, they were very careful and they kept it secret from other people. And so that's the situation in the past. So for that reason, just because it was not widely known in India, that doesn't mean that it was not there. Even if it was not widely known in India, it could have been here in a place or in a couple of isolated places and hidden. Now, the thing that I mentioned before, Atisha was like the center of a study of Tantra in India was Vikramashila, and the abbot of Vikramashila was Atisha. Not only that, many of the masters or the leaders of the various temples in India had given Atisha the keys to the temples, and so for that reason, when he was someone who had an extremely very broad knowledge. So when he saw so many Vajratantras that there just were not there in India. Now, if they're in Tibetan, you could say that the Tibetans had made them up. But because they're Sanskrit manuscripts that he saw in Samye, and what did he say? He said probably Madhusamva must have brought them from somewhere else through miraculous powers. I've never seen any of these before. In general, there is no end to secret mantra. There's no way that you can run of it. The tantras, there's no way there's no end to them. Prior to that, he had thought that he had a bit of pride to thinking that he had been knowledgeable about the mantra, but when he saw all these texts, he lost all that pride, and he thought the tantra is just inconceivable. And so there's something we need to consider. So if we look at this account, we can deduce that at Samya at this time, there are many tantras and mantric texts, and also tantras of Dzogchen. We can guess that they must have been there, or assume that they must have been there. Some later scholars, what they said is that the Nyingma tantras aren't correct, because the way they explain things is different than the way that's taught in the Sarma tradition. And so therefore, they can't be correct. And if we say that, I think it's a little difficult. If we take an example of this, so the explanations of the Tantra are different than those in the Prajnaparamita Sutras, right? But just because they're different from these explanations in the Prajnaparamita Sutras, we cannot say that merely for that reason that the Tantras are incorrect. And so if we don't consider the issue from all angles and just completely insist on make objections, then there's a danger in the end we're going to slapping our own selves in the face. There's a danger that this will happen. So when I look at this, when we look to see whether a Dharma lineage is valid or not, or whether its sources are reliable or not, it's not just a question to be explained in philosophical terms. And primarily what it comes down is we need to see whether there's a clear logical history of its origins. But, as I have said in the past, this really struck me, and so if we say it over again. So the ancient Indians took little interest in history. They sort of thought that things that seeing with their own eyes was enough. We can all see it, so why do I need to write it? Everyone can see it. They said, why do I write it down? Because they see something with their own eyes, and everyone can see the event, so why bother writing it down? I had food today, they write. And I went to bed at this time. There's no point in writing that down, right? But at that time, there is no difference. But if you think about the later people, the later generation, it's extremely important. So the people of India at that time just thought that everything they saw was fine and didn't really take much of a responsibility for the people in future generations and keep a written record. So it's a very difficult, it gives a great difficulty. And the reason is that even that is something that that is disputed when the Buddha was born and passed away. And in comparison to that, Tibet is a little bit better. We have a little bit more interest in history in Tibet. However, but there are a lot of difficulties in terms of historical documents in Tibet, whether there are the historical documents or there are not. For example, the historical documents from the time of the ancient traditions are extremely rare. In Tibet, and also the period of time where the history basically just went blank. And so this gives a great difficulty to the people who research the history of the Nyingma Ancient Translation School. For example, if you think about the only liberation story of Guru Rinpoche that accords with our shared perceptions, is there any of those? There's one by Tadanath called the Indian story of liberation. That's the only one that takes ordinary people's perceptions as a basis. The rest of them are mostly termas or revelations, and with them there are many differences in how they explain things. And this happens, right? Likewise, what we also often say, is that Guru Rinpoche not only went to Uzang, but he went to Bhutan and Amdo and Kham and everywhere in Tibet. So there's a place, even the smallest area of Tibet, he said that there's no place in Tibet that Guru Rinpoche didn't set foot. There's no place there where he didn't go. Even when we think about how long he spent in Tibet, how many months, how many years did he spend in Tibet? There's so many different ways explained. And if we haven't, because there's so many, take all these different explanations, if we need to kind of fit them against the dates of the dynasties and so forth, it's very difficult. And so for that reason, we need to distinguish between the common and the uncommon liberation stories, compare the dates with the reigns of queens, and use modern research techniques at an appropriate standard. And this is very important for us to do. Also, there's a text called The Lamp for Dhyana by Nup Sangye Yeshe. And it's really important for us to examine this text carefully. And the reason is that there's we often talk about the Chinese Huashang, or the Chinese Zen tradition. And there's a lot said in there about the Dzogchen practices. And if we look at this, I think that this would be if we want to research the difference between the views of Zen and Dzogchen, I think of looking at this, I think that we have a lot of, and the development of the Dzogchen view, I think we Tibetans have a lot of misunderstandings in this. And so if we want to know what the difference, we have a lot of erroneous views about the Chinese Huashang view. And if we want to understand the difference between the views of the Dzogchen and the development of the Dzogchen view and so forth, we should take interest in this text. It's an invaluable text. And so this is another thing that we need to really pay attention to. But when we research this, but when you look at this, we actually also have to determine what Nup's Sangye Yeshe's dates are. But there are many different positions on this. But I think the most logical one is that he was at the same time as the king Ngada Pelgard Sen. And so I'd like to ask the scholars to please research this. Otherwise, I'm unable to say much about it. In any case, in terms of historical terms, historically, there are many objections to the Nyingma Dharma. And there are many people who give them a hard time. And if we think about this, for one thing, if we think it'd be in order to rectify corruption in the text, or to lead to understanding of one particular philosophy and practice, and to clarify history and events. And so I think that they have a good positive influence. Not only that, if we only think, oh, they're objecting to the Nyingma, and eliminate all of the objections and think they're inauspicious, that's not how we should do it. Instead, we need to consider them and study them. And if there's more benefit to if we take them as the basis for a study and research. No, I'm going to return the events that are our actual topic, and those events are, as I said the other day, as I said the other day, Mikyu Dorje, I'm showing a picture here. And so this picture is it's a picture of the addition of the objections to the Nyingma school, response to the objections to the Nyingma school that we published. This was published by the Nitartha Institute under the direction of Dzogchen Punlun Rinpoche. So we published this book during the time of the 900th anniversary of Tuzum Khenpa. Now, as I said the other day, Karmapa Mikyu Dorje wrote many works about, including commentaries on Sutra and Tantra. And so this writing so many commentaries on Sutra and Tantra, what it shows is he had a great interest in Buddhist philosophy and practice. He was very interested in this. And so it shows this. it also shows that his own particular way of viewing these topics, the Buddhist philosophy and the practice, his own way of seeing things, his own way of looking at things. And so because of this, and so he was not like someone who could say that there was a little book that they say, oh, this is my Guru's fifth instructions, and then get fooled into just following that. Instead, he was someone who worked hard to study all the great texts, the Kanjur and Tenjur. And he was very familiar and did a lot of work with the entire Buddhist literature. I think we can decide that, say that decisively. Generally, among scholars or researchers, they always have, different philosophies and different religious traditions. And so they're from different philosophies and religions. And so because of that, there are often differences in their thoughts or the way they view things. And so when there are different types of thought, and they want to make corrections in each other's thoughts or raise doubts about each other's thoughts or engage in discussion with each other. And this is the tradition or the way it's done for everyone who engages in the study of philosophy. And so the fact that one's making and raising objections and they're speaking about each other, then there's nothing to be surprised. This is just the way it's done among scholars. And this isn't just in Buddhism. All the people who are researching ancient and modern thought, about whether Asian or Western scholars, everyone who's researching ancient and modern thought are like that. Especially for someone such as Mikyo Dorje, who was a scholar who wrote and an author of many commentaries. It's the fact that he made objections or raised doubts and so forth and discussed with them. But you don't need to mention that, of course, he did that. So when we're discussing whether or not Mikyo Dorje wrote the letter objecting to the questions to the Nyingma, before we determine it and say, he wrote it, we can't say no. We say he didn't examine it. It's difficult to say definitively either way. So before we decide, we need to think about the background situation, the reasons to decide. So what we first need to do, we need to think about the background situation, the reasons first. Only when we look at the background situation, the reasons, only then can we determine whether he wrote it or not. If we don't think about that at all and say, look at the colophon says it was written by Mikyo Dorje, then therefore say it was written by Mikyo Dorje, then that's difficult to say. Now, as the other day, I mentioned a few of the reasons why Mikyo Dorje must not have written it, the reasons why he was not the author of it. I spoke about these the other day. Now, it's not only that. And so, no, I think we need, but we shouldn't just look at those. We should also look at from many other angles as well. And so I think that we should examine, and we have to examine. So the next one, I thought I've seen some other reasons that I introduced you. And the first of these reasons is that, and so when we look at his character and other situations, we said that there is a probability that he didn't receive it. And then the second reason, main reason why he later scholars would say that would take it as if Mikyo Dorje had written. The main reason is that Mikyo Dorje, the reason that they made that they objected to it is because they didn't read his response to the objections. And so when you think about the time when the letter of objections or questions appeared was when Karmapa Mikyo Dorje was about 46 years old. And at that time that it appeared, it was not long after the appearance of the letter that he wrote the text explaining, say, that it was not him who wrote it. He's explaining this. And he also gave responses to the questions that it raised. Now, it's possible that some people might say, though, that just merely the fact that he says he didn't write it does not necessarily prove that he didn't write it. even if he had written it, he could say that he didn't write it. It's possible that he might think that. So what we need to do then, and so like it says, words follow the wish to speak, right? So when you say the words follow the wish to speak, we therefore need to consider the author's character. See, what type of a person was the author? What was their thought? What was their character? We need to examine that. And then we can decide whether the author would have written that text or not. That's important. It's important for us to do this. Now, regarding the first, one reason is that as I feel for myself, I'm pretty familiar with Mikyo Dorje's work. I can't say that I'm 100% familiar with everything, but I do have a certain degree of familiarity with him and his work. Because I am thinking in terms of that familiarity, Mikyo Dorje was someone who just always raised questions about the philosophy of the Sakya, Gelug, Kagyu, Nyingma, and he always engaged a lot of dialectical debate. That's just the type of person he was. And his various works. And I don't have to just say, if you look at this text, he clearly writes. He writes about his own views and thought about other schools without hiding anything, without holding anything back. In particular, regarding the Nyingma, he wrote in his text, the words distinguishing Dharma from Dharma. This is in the collected works of Mikyo Dorje. And what it says that the view taught in Dzogchen and the division of philosophical schools was not generally accepted or generally known among Buddhists. And also the methods of manifesting luminosity by squeezing the two eyes and so forth were not valid. And also then that other than the Dharma tissue extracted from a pillar in the Jokan temple in Lhasa, the Dharmas reserved in Tibet were not credible. Otherwise, none of the other Dharmas work. We cannot really think of them as they're not really terribly authoritative, he said. So he does say this. Likewise, there is a text called The Dialogue with Gyatran Chadalwa. So what Gyatran Chadalwa gives a question saying that the Guru Rinpoche is superior to the Buddha in 5 different ways. And because he's superior in 5 different ways, then there's definitely no mistakes in among the disciples in his lineage. When he asked this question, then what Mikyo Dorje's response was that in general, then the Guru Rinpoche, when we say that it's 5 ways, there are scriptures that say this, but these are, as I say, speaking figuratively, or giving a guiding meaning. They're not definitive. But merely saying that alone does not mean that Mikyo Dorje from his heart didn't like other schools, in particular disliked them in Nyingma. You can't say that. When he speaks like this, it's mainly because he's telling the way he sees the various other philosophies and schools and expressing his own opinion. He's just saying that. He's not saying it absolutely must be the way I say it is. And we can tell this when we look at his other works. In general, what we need to understand is that Mikyo Dorje's character was extremely direct and blunt. Because he's so direct and blunt, whatever he thought in his mind, he just said it without hiding anything. It just got out, left from his mouth. He couldn't help himself from saying. So normally you should hold a few things back, but his character was that he couldn't help himself and spoke. And he himself said, I say various different things in my mind. I'm one of these people who say this. He also accepted this. And a student, Pausula Trengwa, also said that Mikyo Dorje also spoke like this. So if when you look at it from an angle, when he says so many different things, This is some particular character, his own individual character. And from another angle, because he's a logical thinker, and then when somebody is a logical thinker, when they see something that that follows logic or not, they immediately say, oh, there is a fault or not. In any case, Mikyo Dorje himself, there are times when he raised questions and made objections about the Kaiju and other schools, and he did this to other schools. There are these points that he did make all these. So we cannot say that he didn't make any objections to other schools at all. We can't say that, and there's no point in saying that either. But I don't think that we can say that he made objections to other schools, and therefore he objected to the Nyingma, and therefore, because he objected to the Nyingma, therefore he must have written the objections to the Nyingma school. We can't say that categorically. And the reason why we can't say that, when we look at the objections to the Nyingma from the beginning to the end, were written with a particular purpose and end of refuting specifically the Nyingma. And as someone that is written with someone who had a kind of a malicious intent. And if he had written in purpose, he would have known how people would have seen it. Mikyo Dorje was not just any old person. He was someone who understood things. He had experience. Because of this, if he said this is how it and disseminated it, he would know how people would receive it. And so I think if he understood clearly the pros and cons of writing such a letter, and if he still insisted on writing it, I don't see any reason why he would have done that. Now, if you have some other really reliable evidence that shows that he wrote it, then I could support that. But I haven't seen any other clear reason why he would have done that. And particularly, it was also, as I mentioned before, Mikyo Dorje was a Lama with a really particular character. And so in terms of philosophical thought, he was someone who was confident enough to think about and explain the meaning of the philosophical treatises. If he had actually written the letter objecting to the Nyingma, I think he would have admitted that he had. And the reason because he makes objections in his other writings, as if he had written the objection to the Nyingma, he would have accepted that he'd written and said, yes, I wrote it. And so for these reasons that I've explained, and then in addition, there's another reason we need to think about is that prior to Mikyo Dorje, there are many great masters such as Sakya Pandit and so forth who made well-known and strong criticisms of other schools. It's not just that there are one or two scholars who did this, there are quite a few of them. And when they make the criticism, so first one person make a criticism, rejection, the other person make a response. And they did. And there's a tradition of this back and forth of objecting and criticizing each other. Likewise, the person who asked Mikyo Dorje to write a criticism of his work was Mikyo Dorje himself, as it is said. And when we look at this, if Mikyo Dorje had him first written a letter of objection to the Nyingmas, and then if he dared to write such a criticism, I don't think that he'd be unable to admit and say, "Oh, I'm the one who wrote that letter." In particular, it was not long after the letter of objection appeared, and then it's not long after that he wrote the text saying he didn't write it. There would have been no point for him to deny it then. So if we look at it from all these different angles, I think there are many reasons why Mikyo Dorje, there are more reasons for why Mikyo Dorje must not have written this objection to the Nyingma. And the fact that he wrote the response to the letter of objections is to show that he really didn't write this. And I think it's very clear that this is the truth of the situation. And so that's how I see it. I see that this is that it's clear that the truth of the situation is that he had not actually written the objections. But another question I might have is that if he had written all these questions, then what would it have been? Even if Mikhail Dorje had written the objections to the Nyingma school, first thing I would think is first he wrote down all of the different questions that he had, as in a sort of a criticism, and because of the criticism, then in his response, he wants to investigate each of the questions in great detail and wrote particular explanations of each of them. And I think that because of that, I think there's actually probably more help than harm to the Nyingma. But one disappointing thing is that most later Kagyu followers and followers of the Nyingma, most of us spread the idea that the Karma had objected to the Nyingma, and they were unable to say that Mikhail Dorje had made a response to them. Because of this, there's been a controversy that lasted several hundred years. And primarily what this shows is that we followers have not been able to take on the responsibility for our own teachers and for our own gurus. Mikhail Dorje made the objections. He objected to the news. That's all we say. We don't say that we don't ever say that he made a response saying that saying this is the answer to these doubts about the Nyingma, and that he wrote them clearly. And so for that reason, the reason for the controversy has lasted for many years is because we followers haven't been up to the task. So I think now it's probably best to take a break, a half-hour break, and then we will continue with the teaching. Next, I would like to think about the second issue. This is it. So I'm thinking about the second reason. The second reason is, or this issue is, so why did so many later scholars take it for granted that Mikhail Dorje had written the objections to the Nyingma and written their response to it? So what is the reason why this occurred? And I think that there are three main reasons. And so I think there are three main reasons why this was the case. So in general, when you think about it, the main reason is that the response, that Mikhail Dorje's response to the objections did not reach many people. And the reason why it didn't reach all of these people is, I think there's several different reasons why they hadn't seen the objections. And I think to sum it up, there are three. And the first of these is that at that time, it was the 16th century. In Tibet in the 16th century, it was not like today, an information age, we could say. So they hadn't yet reached the information era. So even sending letters to each other was not at all easy. And particularly many texts were handwritten manuscripts. Most of them were handwritten manuscripts. And if something's a handwritten manuscript, there's only one original. Maybe usually there's only one. And if there's only one original, you have to have someone who copies it. Copies every letter. They copy every letter and copy it. And so if you're going to send it, then it's just copy it out by hand to display it. So it's something that the people of our day cannot conceive, more difficult than we can possibly imagine. These days, what we do is if we've written something, if we have the widget, if you send something in your WeChat account, or you post it on Facebook, just merely posting it, then immediately many people can see it. Within a few seconds, many people will have seen it. And so for that reason, the scholars of that time saw the letter of objections to the Enigma that Miki Dorje purported to write, but they did not see his response to the explanation, the objections, or his explanation. And so I think this had a great effect on their making the explanation. So I think there's understandable that they saw the objections, but not the responses. Now, the second reason is that Miki Dorje wrote this a response to the objections of the explanation, and then he passed away only a year later because he only lived to the age of 48. So he wrote the response to the objections when he was 46 or 47, only passed away only a year later. And so because of that, because Miki Dorje passed away, he was unable to spread that response to the objections to many people. It was like a drop in an ocean, because the author himself had passed away. So. And there wasn't really anyone else who was really supporting it or putting any effort behind it. If we only think about even this current incident, I think we can clearly understand it. The fact that we're able to see the response to Miki Dorje wrote is that only that after 1998, so this is in the 1998s, many of Miki Dorje's old writings were found in the Drepung and Potala libraries. And so the further we were able to see that there was actually responses to the objections. We were actually to see it. And prior to that, it's still difficult for us to find, and it's even still hard. Now, the manuscripts in Drepung and Potala are primarily have been there in a place for 300 years where no one else was able to, from outside, was able to see them. When we look at many of these reasons, I think that Miki Dorje's writings, it was difficult to even see them and difficult for people to read them. It was hard for people to read them. Now, the third reason is that if this objection to the Nyingma that was purported to have been written by Miki Dorje was written by someone else, what kind of person would that person be? They'd be a really audacious person. Because for the one reason, if we think that first they're appropriating Miki Dorje's name, not only are they appropriating his names, they're taking his name and making an objection to the Nyingma, instead of thinking that they must want to cause a controversy. So that person must have been a real scoundrel. And so in addition to that, this is someone who must have really been very good at fomenting disputes, someone who could make really evil plans. So it's unnecessary to mention this. So for this reason, someone who used the Karmapa's name and wrote a letter that would offend all the Nyingmapas. So because of this, for one, if we look at it from in a very short time, he wanted to make sure that a lot of people would see it in a short time, that everyone would pique everyone's interest. And so he had, from the beginning, he'd make plans so that would happen. And from another aspect, if Miki Dorje's response had spread widely, then it would be a problem for the person who had written the objections. And so he probably did what it's possible that he would have done whatever he could to make sure that Mikio Dorji's response would not disseminate widely. This is because the more widely Mikio Dorji's response spread, the more the letter, his own letter would lose its effectiveness and turn into just lose its effectiveness. And not only that, in addition, because it's possible that people would, because it was a letter that had been written that they had written in order to make it sound like it was written by Mikio Dorji, then people would probably come and, if Mikio Dorji hadn't written it, then people would come make inquiries and come after them. People would want to know what the truth of the situation was. And so because of many such conditions, Mikio Dorji's response to that letter did not spread widely. Even now, in the 21st century, when we're in the information age, whether we think about in terms of book form or picture form, there are only a few copies of the response, and many people have never seen it. And so in the old days, it's even more difficult to make connections with each other and to see each other. It's much, much harder at that time. So at that time, I think there are therefore many reasons why Mikio Dorji's response to the objections were not seen by many people at that time. Now, so if these people have never seen Mikio Dorji's response to the objections, then what most people would think is that Mikio Dorji had written the letter of objections. They'd see his name, and at the end it's written in very big letters, the name Mikio Dorji. And then people would not even begin to question whether Mikio Dorji had written. And the reason for that is that they'd wonder who would have stolen Mikio Dorji's name and written this. It's even difficult to suspect that might have been the idea that be so audacious as to do and think that hard for people to think about that. In particular, these objections to Nyingma are not just any old letter. It was in fact a really difficult letter with very hard questions, and so it's not just something that any old person could write. And in particular, if this letter of objections came into the hands of people from other schools, they wouldn't really be familiar with Mikio Dorji's characters or with his works and activities. They'd have very familiar with it, and they wouldn't have had much interest in it. So when it's said that Mikio Dorji wrote it, they just take it for granted it's so, and they wouldn't begin to investigate whether Mikio Dorji had ever written it or not. They wouldn't even begin to think about it. And so for these reasons, many people in later times just decided that Mikio Dorji had written it. So one would say to one person, one person to 10, and 10 would say to 100, and it was just like pounding nails into wood, and it became like a fixed situation. Likewise, there are many responses to this letter of objections that was said to be written by Mikio Dorji, as I mentioned before. And so one of the main reason why people had to take such great interest in these objections that were said to be written by Mikio Dorji is because Soktolpa wrote about it. The main point of this is that Mikio Dorji, he's taking it for granted that Mikio Dorji had written it. He's taken whether he said the style is very good, the meaning is very weighting, the logic is really very strong. And so this is what he says. So if you look at this, whether or not the objections were written by Mikio Dorji or not, the objections themselves, some of the questions are extremely difficult or really hit difficult points. And so for that reason, the followers of the Nyingma had a very strong feeling for it, and then they wanted to, many of them discussed it, and they wanted to tell their opinions. So just now, when such objections happen, not only in the Nyingma schools, if such a situation happened in any school, then people would have a reaction to it that have the same reaction to it. For example, if a scholar from another school made an objection to the Kanjus, then someone within the Kanju would get up. If they were to point at criticism of the Kanju, someone from inside the Kanju would certainly stand up and respond. And so for many such reasons, over the last over 400 years, the scholars of several different centuries have written many responses to that letter objecting to the Nyingma as if Mikyo Dorje had written it. And what this shows on the one hand is that they had a lot of affection for and partiality to the Nyingma teachings in the past. And on the other hand, what it shows is that most of them took it for granted that the letter had been written by Mikyo Dorje, because in terms of the author's reputation and because of its content, they thought it was going to be very influential. And so therefore, they wrote many responses. If it were different and had just been summoned by some nobody, then it's impossible that they would have taken such interest in it. So in brief, the conclusion here is that when we're discussing with other people's and in particular historical figures, manners and thought, and what their expressions and characters are, even in our own lives, we don't really know what they are. And when we're thinking about historical figures' thought and expression, we sometimes have to explain this. And when we get to the point we have to speak about other people's ways of thinking and so forth, the way we need to prepare our own minds for that is that it's extremely important for us to be impartial. Like it's very important for us to be calm and methodical and relaxed. We need to have the motivation and the courage to justify and verify these things when we research. Sometimes when you see these things, you get very emotional. You have a very strong feeling, right? There's a danger that you're going to get angry, right? But that must not happen. It's not good if you do. You have to be relaxed. When you're talking about a situation where there's a real point there, it's not okay to just lose control of yourself. We want to make the meaning clear. And in order to determine what the meaning, you're having this. That's why you're having the discussion. So it's important to be very relaxed in your mind. And we have to have the motivation. We want to justify things and verify. If we only stand up and boast and say false things, that's not okay. We want to be able to justify and verify everything. We have to have that motivation. If we're able to do research in this way, then only then can we reach the standards for specialists and researchers, I think. Many people these days say we need to be in accord with science. And we talk about in accord with science. I think this is the way that we can reach that standard of being in accord with scientific methods. So that kind of research is a lot of our normal ways of doing debate. Because when we do debate, we have to have some logic of the proof. You need actual logic that can really get to refute the position. You have to have clear examples and analogies that can justify it. You have to have an analogy. You have to have a valid logic of proof. And then in that basis, when we're engaging in the debate, only then can we find what we're trying to establish, what we're trying to prove. And so we need to look at search for the factual truth. If we only hold on to positions, we say that they're the main ones, they're the best ones, and that they're true. And if other people don't accept them, then we might get angry at them. And then we get unhappy. And then we use any kind of insults to tear other people down. This might happen, right? So basically, if you don't have no evidence or reasons, the first time you look at something, it might seem like there's a good reason for it. But when you examine it logically, you can't find them. And it can't withstand the analysis. And so And if we, there are lots of things that we speak about these that are like this, and we shouldn't think that there's anything amazing or wonderful about them. And if we shouldn't be amazed, then it's even less necessary for us to get angry over them. It's kind of like watching an action movie. It's like when you're watching an action movie, right? At the moment, it seems like it's really hot and intense. It's really really exciting. But actually, it's just a show. It's not real. It's not a real situation. And when you know that it's not real, then there's no great reason to get so excited or to get scared by it. And in particular, when we're doing research, not only do we need to use authentic analysis ourselves, we also need to be able to must be able to accept other people's reasons for how things are, or their corrections to our views or the opinions they give. If otherwise, if we only, without having much level of education, if we always speak with bravado merely for the sake of extracting others, and that's basically the talk of someone who's always taking shortcuts. It's not really someone who's has any value in terms of logical philosophy. So it's really important that we follow the paths of logic. So next, in connection with our main topic for today, I'd like to sort of think about in terms of our Kagyu overall and the practice liturgy and the Karma Kamsa in particular, and how they're connected to the other Tibetan schools. I thought I'd talk about that in general terms. So among these, later if we talk about the eight chariots of the practice lineages from the writings of Jamgonda Lodro time. So if you look among them, if you think about the Sakyapa, most of our Karma Kamsa explanations of sutra texts, the lineage goes back to the Sakya school, including the great Sakya scholars Rantan Sheja Kunsik, Chantrab Jampa, Sangyapa, and his student Sanjay Chogle Namgyal, and many other Sakyas. So basically, our tradition of sutra explanations comes from the Sakya school. And it's important for us to know this. And if we think about the Gelugpa school, the Gelugpa, they teach the Mahamudra and the 6 yogas of Naropa. And Jesompa learned these from the Kansampa. And the other Gendopan masters follow this according to the Kagyu school. And the main tantric practice of the Gelug school is the Guhya Samaja. And in that Guhya Samaja Tantra, if we think about their explanations of it, they emphasize the explanations of the tradition of Marpa. Likewise, their main sutra path is the stages of the path and mind training. That's what they consider the most important. And these come from the Kadampa school. And so, for these reasons, so generally, there are a few differences or variations in how they explain the Middle Eastern view and so forth. But in terms of Dharma in general, there's actually a very close connection between the Kagyu and the Gelugpa. But a lot of people don't seem to understand this. And then there's the 6 yoga school or the Jonang school. From the time of Karmapaksha and Ranjan Dorje, there's been a very profound connection. Most previous Kagyu Lavas have professed the Shantongpa view, and later, from the time of Siddha Jugajunyan onward, there are many people who have taught the Shentong school, the Shentong view in general, and in particular, they have taught it as it is taught in the Jonangpa school. That's what they've begun to teach in this way. And so for this, in terms of the view, there's kind of like an inseparable connection between the Jonang and the Karmakaju, and this connection continues into the present. Likewise, the Shambhakaju and the Shiche or the Chu lineage, and then Dorji Nyendrup and other lineages also spread within the Karmakaju around the time of Karma Ranjan Dorje, and later the kindness of Jamgon Lodotai. The main upholders of their lineages has been the Karma Kamsan. And so for these reasons, there are a lot of connections between the Karma Kamsam and other lineages. It's a very deep connection. And that's something we need to pay attention to. There's, among all the different Tibetan lineages, there's none that's not connected to the other, related to the other. We think that we're all completely pure and completely different, but there's none that is completely pure. So how can you be completely pure like that? They're also completely separate, because there's really none where there wasn't any connections with each other that developed independently of each other. So actually being completely pure lineage is just not going to happen. So next, I would like to speak about our particular topic for today, which is the relations with the Nyingma. So in terms of, if we speak about it in terms of the Nyingma school, the founder of the Karma Kamsan lineage was glorious Dusum Khenpa, as everyone knows, right? So the first Dusum Khenpa's father was from a Nyingma family. And some of the letters they said is that his father. Some people say it was his grandfather. In any case, his ancestral protector was Ranjun Gyalmo, and so one of the main protectresses of the Kamsan lineage is Ranjun Gyalmo or Sri Devi. And so this comes from Dusum Khenpa, and that lineage comes from the ancestral. It comes from Dusum Khenpa's ancestry, and so that's why it spread to the Karma Kamsa. Likewise, Ranjan Dorje, Dusum Khenpa received many Nyingma Dharma teachings from Chujajat Karmawa, such as the Western lineage of Aro Dzogchen. And so for this reason, the founder of the Karmakaji lineage, the Dusum Khenpa, is what we're talking about in terms of his familial lineage, or in terms of the Dharma. He had a relation. He had connections to the Nyingma school.
No,
I'm not going to give introductions to the connection between all of the Karmapas and the Nyingmas, because they're too much to say. But I'm going to speak about those with the greatest connections to the Nyingma. Now, the second was the second Karmapakshi, and his father was also a Nyingmapa. And he had the practice of the protector Bernak Chen, which had been passed down for 13 generations, Taktric foundations. And so this is so Bernak Chen is one of our main protectors, right? And so this is passed down from Karmapakshi's parents, right? And so that's the practice. Then he received teachings from Kato Chambabum. So Kato, in the old days, had been a center for the spread of the Nyingma teachings on Sutra Tantra and the mind instructions. And so from the Kato Chambabum, he received the teachings on the summary of the Tantra Sutras, the Net of Illusion, and the 18 Marvels of Mind. And at the same time, he had the memories of previous lifetimes. He remembered where he had been born in previous lives, and he remembered that during the time of, in the past, during the time of Indra Bodhi, and the time of King Ja, and the time of Garak Bodha, he remembered that he had studied many of the secret mantras of the Nyingma and the Sarma school that he remembered. And because of them, he waked through that. He remembered how to wake them, and he made the view of the meditation, the union of Mahavajra Dzogchen, the main point of his pointing out the crux of the four kayas. He made this his main practice. He also wrote many different treatises, including commentaries on the three types of yoga and their colophons. And what he wrote is, this Dharma will not be complete until the Dharma into samsara. So He wrote that his text might disappear, but the Dharma would never. Also, as I said the other day, there are many different volumes in Karma Pakchi's view, but it's said that most of them have actually been preserved in China, actually. And because he spent such a long time in Mongolia, most of his works are in China. In general, there are over 100 volumes. And it's said that the majority of them include Nyingma Dharma, as it is sometimes said. And then the next is Drupta Urjinpa. Now, the reason why I need to mention Drupta Urjinpa now is that, for one perspective, is that he was a student of Karma Pakchi. And the second reason is that he was a student of Gotsampa, who had the same level of austerity as Gotsampa. And so the main reason I'm speaking about him is from the time he was 7 until he was 16, he practiced primarily Nyingma practice, including Vishuddha Heraka and Vajrakilaya. And later he had found some long life water that Padmasambhava had hidden at Shuo Mountain and became the guru of the Mongol emperor. But the main thing that I want to speak is that he went to India. He went to Udayana and other places. What he said, so many later scholars said that the Dzogchen and the Summas didn't find in India, but if you were to make a catalog of all the Sanskrit manuscripts that he saw, if he just took the ones on Dzogchen, just gathered the names, and then he said it'd be like as long as the Prajnaparamita Sutra in 100,000 lines. It'd be extremely long, he said. And so I think this is a really great point here. Now, Urjinpa's main student and the reincarnation of Karma Pakchi was Karmapa Ranjan Dorje, the third Karmapa. Now, Karmapa Ranjan was the one who had among all the Karmapas, he's the one who had the greatest connection to the Nyingma. The strongest, there's a greatest point about this, and he's the greatest connection. The original person with whom he studied the Nyingma teachings was Drupta Urjinpa. And also from Nyingma Kunga Drupta, he received teachings on many Nyingma tantras, including the summary of the intent, the net of illusions, the 18 marvels of mind. And particularly while he was at Karma Good, he had a pure vision of Vimalamitra dissolving into the spot between his eyebrows. And because of that, he realized the meaning of the Nyingtak just as it is. And he wrote a text called the Karma Nyingtik. And so within the Nyingtik tradition, this is a particular, he had particular qualities there. And so really what happened is he had already received the ultimate lineage in terms of pure visions, but he saw that in our common perceptions, it's important to follow a guru and to receive a lineage that had been passed down from Guru Padmasambhava. And so at that time, the main person upholding the Dzogchen view was Kumaraja. Kumaraja. So the main person upholding was Melong Dorje. So Kumaraja was actually a student, who was actually a Dharma friend of Ranjan Dorje, because when Ranjan Dorje was studying with Drupta Urjinpa, Ranjan Dorje and Kumaraja were both students of the same teacher, but Kumaraja became a great Mahasiddha who had a realization of Dzogchen, and so for that reason, Migya Dorje received the teachings from Kumaraja, the teachings on the Nyingtik cycle, on the Vimalamitra Nyingtik cycle. Also, according to some accounts, Ranjan Dorje met the Teratan Pema Lejitsal, and the Pema Lejitsal offered him the empowerment and transmission of the young schools. However, according to the history of the Nyingtak by Yuntenpa, it said that at that time, Pema the time that Pema Lodronsal extracted the Dakini, the Khandro Nyingtik treasures, his assistant had been Loten Dorje Bum, and so that he was the one who gave the transmission to Rangjung Dorje. And it doesn't mention that he met Pema Lodronsal. So this is not that. There's no mention of Rangjung Dorje meeting Pema Lodronsal himself. This is a point that we also need to investigate. So one of his students was Shogyase Lekten, and so what it says in his autobiography is that when he's 42 in when he's at the age of 42 at the water monkey year, he was invited by the Dharma Lord Rangjung Dorje to Kongpo, and he brought some yellow scrolls of the Khandro Nyingtik, and he transmitted to them in full with empowerments and additions from that yellow scroll. And he spent 3 months with the Rangjung Dorje and received countless teachings from Rangjung Dorje. And Pema Jesse Lekten said he had given these teachings. It's written in the. Now, all of the Termatas were written on the yellow scrolls, and he gave that yellow scroll to. So just a couple of years after that, Shogyase Lekten. So Pema Lodronsal extracted them. He had the yellow scrolls. He gave them to Shogyase Lekten. So he took them and he didn't show them at anyone. He kept them secret. He kept them hidden. And so then, like 10 or 11 years, he was invited by Rangjung Dorje. Rangjung Dorje, only then did he show these Dzogchen texts to that, and based on the yellow scroll itself. There's no question of it being of translating. It was just from that yellow scroll itself. He gave the empowerments and transmissions of the Khandro Nyingtik, or the Dakini Nyingtik. And so Shogyase Lekten wrote this in his own autobiography. Likewise, another master of the Nyingtik teachers was Longchen Rajampa. So as I mentioned before, so this is he was said to be a rebirth of Pema Lodronsal. So he, Longchenpa and Rangjung Dorje listened to many teachings together. And there was also in Longchenpa's in Rangjung Dorje's works, there's a dialogue with Rangjung Dorje and questions on difficult points. It's continuing the collection of works of Longchenpa, and what it says in here, there is no one else who could dispel the doubts in my mind other than the all-knowing one himself, whose unified Vajra mind is profound peace, great bliss, and spontaneous. Therefore, I have asked these questions. And likewise, at the end of these questions, may I, from now until the essence of intellect may be born in the presence of the Rangjung Guru, enjoy the oceanic feast of Dharma, and reach the peace that is free of doubt. So in any case, when you see there's a very deep connection between Longchenpa and Karmapa Rangjung Dorje. When you think about the other lineages, there are many teachers who had received Nyingma teachings, and there are many Kaji Lamas who received Nyingma teachings. But Rangjung Dorje not only received Nyingma teachings, he was also had a great influence, had a great effect in spreading and disseminating the Dzogchen teachings. For that reason, both Rangjung Dorje and Longchenpa are considered the main students of Khmer Ronsa. And later, what was said by Yung Trungpa is that the master of the teachings was he said that the master of the teaching was Longchenpa, but Rangjung Dorje is one who spread it. So not only did he receive them, but he also spread them to other people. And he was one of the main person who spread the teachings of Dzogchen in Tibet, China, and Mongolia. And what it says in the commentary on this is that, and so there's a place called Tsupa Dechen. It's a little bit nearby nearby Tsrupa, and I've gone to this mountain once. It's a very isolated place, and there was a attendant of what is called Lopinyeshi Jetson. He wrote a commentary. He wrote a life's liberations review of Rangjung Dorje, and he made the reasons, and there are 5 of them. So him and Dr. Kambok Jason, Toten Gemras, Dr. Melongpa, himself, and Yung Tumba. And so then it's so that's when there's also a shrine master and a tea server, right? So these attendants, right? So just 7 people there, not a whole lot of people. Just to these 7 people, he gave the complete empowerments of the Dzogchen Nyingtik. And so the way he gave the instructions now, the way he made the transmission was according to the text, including the Confucius scholars, Rangjung Dorje himself said, what he said to them is, if these teachings of Dzogchen, they're really, really important, and if they disappear, then it's an incredible loss. So in order that the teachings of Dzogchen do not disappear, we must spread them in all directions. So Yunten Dorje Pel, you need to go to Tsang to go spread them there. Yeshe Johnson, you need to go to Kam and Kompo and spread them. Yegyewa, another was supposed to go to Mongolia and China. And Menlopa Shakya Shunu, you should spread them in U, he said. So they directed them, each of them, to go to a different place to spread the teachings on Dzogchen, not only in Tibet, but in China and Mongolia as well. And so because of this, there are many of the lineage and many different branches of the lineage. And so basically the Dzogchen teachings is generally not, before that, the Dzogchen had been spread to just 1 or 2 recipient students, but after that, the Rangjung Dorje spread it in all directions, and for that to continue, was one of the activities of Rangjung Dorje. So the main person who spread this was Rangjung Dorje, and it's protected in the Dankini Nyingtik. And so just as it was, as it said, the Bodhisattva on the earth will spread this to the ocean. And so he did as was predicted, and he spread the teachings. And he said he had an extremely great connection with the Nyingma. Not only did he have a great connection with the Nyingma, but he also had an extremely long-lasting influence and effect in terms of spreading the Dzogchen teachings. Then there was a student of Rangjung Dorje's who was also in the lineage of the masters and disciples, was Gyalwa Yungtumba. So he was very well versed in the entire Sutra teachings, in particular in the compendium of Abhidharma. He had extensive knowledge of all the Nyingma Sarmatans. He'd received many teachings and transmissions and empowerments. Basically, he had nothing. And so his main students, one of them was Rangjung Dorje, one of them was Butang Rinpoche. And so there's basically no empowerment that he had of that time that he had not received. And so that time, from Asur Nanjamith, he read the instruction of the 3 main Nyingma Tantras, and he became a very well versed, he come to know them very well. And in particular, he wrote a commentary called The Illuminating Mirror on the Guhyagarbha Tantra. And this becomes one of the most influential tantras within the Nyingma. And this became a source for later commentaries. He also became very influential in the explanation of the activities on the magic wheel of Dharma. And there's a story, and I better tell you the story about this. Because if I don't tell you the story, you're going to get bored. So what the story is, so this one occasion when the great Sakya Lama, Padan Lama Sunam Jasa, he was one of the main people. Then the all-known Dolpa Bishar Jasa Ingulchu Tome Samba, he's the one who wrote the 37 practices of the Bodhisattva, right? So Jasa Tome Samba, and then Yung Tumba, so it's those. They all got together. And so they had like this incredible, great opportunity to get together. And so that time, so Drulbu said, just kind of jokingly, he said, we're all saying that. People are like the greatest, right? All gathering. So he said, so we're all people who said we're just us, right? But we need to show some signs of our accumulation. We need to show what our accomplishments, what powers we have. And when he said this, and so what they said, what their response, so Dolpopa, what his sign of experience, said he'd memorized everything that had been translated into Tibetan. The Kanjur and the Tenjur, he had it, he had memorized. And so the experience of having the Kanjur in his mind, and this was like everyone was amazed at this. And then Lama Dhamma Sonin also said that he continually took the 4 empowerments. So every day, he took the 4 empowerments continuously. In other words, is continually practicing the practice of the secret mantra. This is like no one else could do. And Gyaltsab Ngolcho Tongpan said, the one who wrote the 37 practices, said he continuously practiced with bodhicitta and become. See, he continues had bodhicitta and never lost his bodhicitta. It's like this is a sign of experience, and there's some experience. So you're talking about these like the experience, the sign of your accomplishment, right? They said this is what happened. The last one was Gyalwa Yungtumpa, right? He was like a mantra practitioner, tantric practitioner, right? And he's a very powerful tantric practitioner. In particular, he practiced a lot of Yamataka. And so he always had a skull with him, actually. And this is actually, it wasn't just the top of the skull, but it's actually the whole thing. It's like the whole face. It had the entire head. And so like, and it had the eye holes and everything. And so you need this when you're doing the Yamataka. So you had the entire human skull. And because of the entire human skull, he took it out. The skull that he always used when he was practicing his Yamataka practice. So it's like, one of his ritual articles, and he said a mantra at it. And this dry skull started to go clack, it bared its fangs, and it started to run around. So this dry skull started running. It's kind of like going around like a cat running around. Everyone's looking at it. What would happen if he would all get afraid if he saw, if he saw a skull racing around the room, he'd all get, and so like we'd probably have a heart attack. And all these other scholars were very terrified. It was actually showing that amazing miracle, the shine of the power of his practice of mantra, right? So what this shows is that he had a very powerful in his practice of the mantra. So this shows. That is what this shows. So then, when we're going through all the different incarnations of the Karmapas, primarily, they had received many empowerments, transmissions of pith instructions of the Nyingma tradition, and I do not need to say much about them. The main person we're speaking about now is Karmapa Mykhyap Dorje. When he was at Tsehlagang and Kompo, he had many visions of Padmasambhava. So he had pure visions of this, and he made a prophecy of repelling an invasion. So Mykhyap Dorje said in one prophecy, said that there would be an invasion that would be repelled. And I'll speak about these prophecies later if I have time, but I don't need to mention them now. Not only that, they're like the 8 forms of Guru Rinpoche. He saw that the 8 forms of Guru Rinpoche, the 8 incarnations of Shang, and also the 8 incarnations of the Karmapa were inseparable, and saw that they were inseparable. And then he wrote a Guru Yoga on this. And this is called the Shankhagyama, or the sealed Dharma of Shang. His full title is The Sealed True Dharma of Shang, the Protector of Beings from the Turquoise Cliff. And this is in his collected works. And this sealed Dharma of Shang is very similar to the main Karma Kamsa and Yoga, the 4 sessions of Guru Yoga. So if you compare them, they're very similar. the seal dharma of Shang is probably longer. The 4 sessions Gurus are taking the essence of that. Similarly, within Mikyo Dorje's, there are commentaries on the pointing out the 3 kayas and pointing out the 4 kayas. They're like 3 or 4 volumes, right? And then these explains the introduction of the 3 kayas. In particular, he explains the thought according to the Nyingma tradition, and that is according to the thought of Karma Pakchi. And so in this way, Mikyo Dorje had a great connection with the Nyingma tradition, the Nyingma Dharma. Also, there are many famous Tertans who are disciples of the Karmapas. So sometimes what it's said is saying that if you want to determine whether an authentic Tertan was authentic or not, it's the Karmapa who had to decide that. I saw that in one history. Likewise, during the time of around the time of Situ Chugi Jingne, one of the Thai Situ Rinpoches, the Terma practice spread widely in the Kamsan. Because many of the pujas and inscriptions that we do in the various monasteries, probably 70% of them are termas, right? This is something we all need to know, right? And because of this, there's been like the term, like the union of Kamsama Nyingma. We say the Kamsa Nyingma, but actually if you look at it, perhaps the Nyingma is a little bit stronger. Even later, within the Karma Kamsang, when transmitting the teachings of the ultimate lineage, there is a tradition to use the instructions from the Dharma, the Nyingma Dharma, the Nyingma lineage. So for this reason, what some scholars from other schools have said is that we don't know much about our own lineage, and we study, do so much Nyingma. And so these scholars from other schools say that they ask, so they said, we're more knowledgeable about the Nyingma than our own traditions. There are people who have, criticized us like that. And so we look at all these. Now, these are all kind of, so I'm describing them in short. If I spoke about them in length, it would take many days, but we don't have them. But when you look at these accounts, we can see that the previous generations of gurus and people respected from all the other Dharma lineages, they had they had respect and faith and pure view for all the other Dharma lineages in the school. And not only did that, they felt close to the schools in their mind, but they also did what they could to take teachings and practice on practice and study from them if they could. If they could serve the other lineages, they did. And so there's a great, majesty in our history, a great sign. And so in order to preserve these impressive story is a responsibility as followers of this lineage. Is something that this is something that's a responsibility we need to do. But our most urgent and important responsibility now is that as followers of the Kagyu, we need to uphold and preserve and propagate the empowerments, transmissions, and practices, especially philosophy, science, and histories of this lineage itself. And the reason for this is that in our present day in the world, in terms of religions in general, and particularly the Buddhism, we've come to this area where we've come to have a lot of change, and we've come to everyone's tasting a big feast. And in particular with Tibetan Buddhism, it's threatened by many internal and external conditions. And those are causing us difficulties and harm. And so in other words, that's time. And so we need to work for our own benefit, and we need to take care of treasure our own interests. We need to take care of our own lineages and our own schools. If we don't take care of our lineage and our own school, then no one else is going to take care of it, will they? Now, if we look back at history, and there are several hundred years where there's a great decline in the Kajus. And the reasons was that primarily is that externally there was a political persecution. You were persecuted politically. You were kind of kicked out of society. There was even a time when Kajus weren't allowed to play drums or ring bells. Likewise, the communities of practice study deteriorated. And so there was no opportunity to be in an environment where we could study the texts of our own tradition and develop into scholars. This is a bad situation. And then later within that, so that's external. Now, in terms of internally, within our lineage, our teachings and our pure attentions weakened. And we didn't really preserve the fine tradition of empowerment, instructions of our own lineage. We didn't take any interest. We didn't take care of the texts, didn't study them, or take interest in philosophy or other lineages. So other people in other schools would say that when they spoke about the Kajus, that we were like rodents who live on mountains. And we became like an object of scorn for all the other lineages. Likewise, from our own selves, we say that I'm Kaju, I'm Karma Kamsa. We have to, it's like we were, and so then it's like we were in a situation, a bad situation, the essence of the conscious about to stir, and then later, there are many of us who begin to slowly wake up from the state of ignorance, but we don't know if it's not too late. It's certainly not too early. We absolutely must search out all of the lineages, empowerments, and transmissions and epithemics that have been passed down from the Kaju 4 of others, and as well as the old texts. We need to restore them if we can. We need to uphold their lineage and take care of them. If we can put some effort into it, there's something that we can do. There's a chance still. But if we still wait a couple more decades and a few more decades, then if we want to put effort into it, then there's nothing that we can put our effort into. So when I talk about, so you have to put effort into your own lineage, some people might think, I'm saying our own lineage might think that I'm really partial to it. But we need to think about it well. If you think about putting yourself in someone else's position, for example, if there was a Buddhist monk that someone who could, people asked him, he could say a lot about Christianity, he could say a lot about it, but he wasn't able to answer any questions about Buddhism, what would it be like? There's probably nothing more embarrassing than that, nothing more shameful. There's someone who says they're a Buddhist but can't say anything about Buddha, but when asked about Christianity, can give a big, long explanation. That's not good. I'm not saying that Christianity is bad. What I'm saying is that we absolutely must study the teachings and practices of other lineages. Not only that, we need to study the other world religions. And if we do not do that, then we won't be able to fit in our current time. But before we study them, we first need to get to the high level of practice and study within our legend. But if we don't have any study or practice of our own lineage, and then we study the other lineages, then it's just like cutting down the tree trunk and then hanging on to the branches. And so we absolutely have to, whether we do study, practice, or activity, we must do whatever we can to put effort into making our own lineage strong and powerful. And this is because it's like the main commitment or the basic responsibility for us who are people that follow this Dharma lineage. So this is the most urgent and important thing we have to do. This is how I think it is. And I'm trying to put a fair amount of effort to do this. And so I'd like to ask all of us who are followers of here, all of you followers of it, please think in this way. And so we can all work together cooperatively within a unified spirit, so that this lineage that we have such a strong connection can be preserved and spread. So basically, for me to really have to talk about the topic of Mikko Dorjin, about the objections of Nyingma. And so he's I wonder, why is he spending so much time talking about this topic? Now, one reason why I'm speaking so much about it is when you think about the lifetime of Mikado Dorje, what's the controversy that happened? One controversy that happened was the controversy of whether he'd written this objection to the Nyingmas. And because that's one reason why I thought it was important to speak about this. Now, the second thing is that if we are able to give good explanations of the important things that Mikado Dorje did in his lifetime, then we can understand what sort of a person is. And we could see what is understand what his character, his body, speech, and mind, and his story of liberation were. And so, to be able to speak a little bit about the topic of Mikado Dorje, and in particular to do this to quite a few people over the course of the internet, I'm really happy about this. The reason I'm so happy about this is, for one thing, is that for over 400 years, there's been unfounded accusation has been laid against Mikado Dorje. And I thought that if I could give some sort of explanation about this, and I thought it'd probably be a good idea. At the very least. Now, at the very least, I have to raise the question of whether the letter objecting to the Nyingma was written by Mikado Dorje or not. So that's one reason why I spoke about it. Now, another thing that I want to speak about is that historically that Kagyu and the Nyingma have generally had very deep and profound connections, and particularly with the Nyingma. And we need to know what the connection between the Kagyu and the Nyingma was. Once we know that, then our dear lineages, we can practice, if we can be able to work together cooperatively without any breaches of samaya or any controversies, so that we can uphold and sustain and spread our own teachings. And I think that this will be very beneficial if we can do this. And this is important for us to know. In 2008, was the first time I went to America. It's the first time I went abroad. So in 1999, I arrived in India, and from then until 2008, I hadn't been allowed to go outside. And I don't need to speak about those events, but in any case, in 2008, when I got to America, I got to the state of California. And there was a Trungten Norba, the son of Dudjom Rinpoche. So Trungten Norba said to me, he said, I have a request for you. And my request is, and so I asked him what the request was. In the past, during the time of Andrew Rinpoche Dorje at Rumtek, now you have this great Tsechu Puja with the Lama dancing, right? Later, they say that you stopped that. So please restore that practice, he said. So he said this to me. I didn't understand what was going on. I think what was it who stopped doing that Tsechu Puja? I didn't have anything to say immediately. I wasn't sure what to say. I said, that didn't happen. I think it's probably not, it's probably held continuously from the time that Rinpoche Dorje started in Shurumdrek, as I said it. I didn't have anything else to say. So I think, what else could I say? I wouldn't even, in my dreams, I would even say, stop doing the Tsechu Puja. I've never even dreamed of doing that. So how is it that Rinpoche said it? Then later after Rinpoche left, what I thought, who would have said this to Rinpoche? So I had this feeling. So this is what is kind of what it's like. These days, we've given the 21st century, but still, there are many still many controversies or issues that people are unable to get over. And so when I think about the connections that we had in the past and in the future, I hope that we can I think it's important for us to work together with a clear vision to sustain a tolerable teaching. So in this way, I've spoken quite a bit about Mikado-just. So in the past, if there's some people who have some friends of mine who might take even greater interest in Mikado-just responses to objections about the news and write down some of their thoughts, then I think it would be excellent. And I'd wish to be able to study them. In any case, if we all work together, if we think about the events that occurred in the past year for Tibet, what are the true events? If we can, it's important for us to know what these are. And so please, all of you, keep this in mind. So that is enough for today. Thank you very much. Now we recite the dedication prayers.